Is it possible to forge a lasting peace with an organization that views its weaponry not merely as a tool of war, but as, well, its very political identity? Good morning, and welcome to the Friday Debate.
Good morning.
We begin this morning's broadcast with an important sponsor message. This program is sponsored by ProWave AI and is generated by Stylo News, the AI-powered news application. For context, Stylo News serves as the consumer iteration of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Which is an incredibly powerful tool.
It is. It's an advanced intelligence architecture traditionally designed exclusively for enterprise operations, so across government, military, and corporate sectors. Through this platform, our listeners now have unique, direct access to the exact same intelligence tools designed to support global decision-makers in, assessing international crises.
And the crisis we are examining today requires precisely that level of objective intelligence. We are analyzing the strategic future of the Gaza Strip as we reach late May in the year 2026.
Right.
The central issue before us is the stalled October 2025 ceasefire. We are witnessing a fundamental, diplomatic and military impasse. On one side, we have the Israeli and American pursuit of absolute security and regional disarmament.
A pursuit of stability, yes.
Exactly. And on the other, we have the geopolitical reality of Hamas's continued entrenchment, which is backed by the expanding influence of Iranian regional networks, whose stated objective remains the elimination of Israel.
Which stands in stark contrast to the historical realities we've seen in the region.
It does. Look at nations like Egypt and Jordan. They have demonstrated that lasting, peaceful relations with Israel are entirely achievable.
Well, the parameters of our analysis today are clearly drawn. My position, based on a rigorous assessment of the intelligence data, is that lasting peace in the region strictly requires the systematic, military-enforced disarmament of Hamas and the securing of strategic territories by Israel.
A position that relies heavily on force.
A position that relies on facts. The historical and current record demonstrates unequivocally that voluntary compliance by this militant organization has failed. This necessitates a factual, security-first approach to alter the physical reality on the ground.
And I will present the contrasting position. The data suggests that unilateral military coercion and the continued expansion of Israeli territorial control are simply politically unsustainable.
Unsustainable in what sense?
In the sense that this strategy risks the permanent division of the Gaza territory, it actively fuels broader regional escalation, and produces humanitarian outcomes that fundamentally undermine the long-term security objectives it claims to serve.
Let us look directly at the facts on the ground. Drawn from consecutive Stylo Intel estimates spanning May 11th through May 25th, 2026.
Okay.
The intelligence community states with high confidence that Hamas will not voluntarily disarm. This is not a matter of speculation. It is an observed reality.
I don't dispute the intelligence estimate regarding their reluctance to disarm. That is factual. However, the question is how one responds to that intelligence.
Well, the response is dictated by their actions. Hamas is actively consolidating its control over the civilian population. They are systematically taxing civilians to rebuild their financial networks.
Right,
And they are openly utilizing the concept of disarmament not as a baseline requirement for peace, but rather as an end-state negotiating chip. Peace cannot coexist with an organization committed structurally to armed resistance. Therefore, Israel's proactive measures are an operational necessity. We see this plainly in the formation of the elite Nilai task force.
Let me pause you there because we need to clarify what the Nilai task force actually is for our listeners who are tracking this from a broader policy level.
Certainly. The Nilai task force is a specialized interagency intelligence and operations unit. It is explicitly tasked with tracking down and eliminating every individual involved in the October 7 massacre.
Right.
Instead of conducting broad, battalion-level sweeps through civilian areas, Nilai utilizes advanced signals intelligence. They cross-reference localized telecommunications data with continuous aerial surveillance to isolate specific targets.
Which is a highly aggressive posture.
It is a precise posture. This is how they executed the targeted airstrike in Gaza City on May 15th, which eliminated Hamas military leader Izz al-Din al-Haddad. It reflects a factual reality security must be established through the precise dismantling of militant infrastructure, when diplomatic avenues fail to produce demilitarization.
While the mechanism of the Nile task force may be highly targeted in theory, one must measure the geopolitical and humanitarian consequences of this strictly military-first approach in practice.
The consequences of inaction would be far worse.
The warnings from international monitors are unambiguous. Nikolay Ladanov and the United Nations Board of Peace have formally cautioned that the current strategic stalemate, combined with Israel's steadily expanding military footprint, risks a permanent, irreversible division of Gaza.
But isn't that division a temporary byproduct of securing the perimeter?
The data indicates it is becoming structural. We are looking at a scenario that leaves 2 million Palestinians without a viable economic or political future.
Even so, the security imperative.
Instead of weakening Hamas's ideological grip, the ongoing military strikes, which, I must point out, have resulted in over 880 Palestinian casualties since the October 2025 ceasefire was brokered, are generating intense international backlash. The empirical result of this approach is not the quiet submission of a militant group. It is the emboldening of regional resistance and a complete stalling of the United States-backed post-war governance plans.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the physical reality of enforcing disarmament. We must move from the theoretical requirement of demilitarization to the logistical facts of the theater.
Okay, let's look at the logistics.
The international community, through various mediators, has entirely failed to enforce United Nations Resolution 2083.
Resolution 2803 being the framework drafted last year to establish a third-party international coalition to oversee disarmament, correct?
Exactly, and mandated an internationally monitored inspection regime to collect and decommission Hamas weaponry. But because no international body has been willing to contribute troops to actually enforce it on the ground, the resolution is effectively paralyzed.
That is an issue of international will, yes?
And in the absence of an international enforcement mechanism, Israel has no strategic choice but to physically expand its security buffer to prevent Hamas from rearming. This is the precise reason for the recent tactical shift from the so-called Yellow Line, which represented Israeli control of roughly 53% of the territory, to the newly established Orange Line.
And we should explain the geography of that shift.
Right. By extending the Orange Line toward the Mediterranean Sea, Israel now maintains over 60% control of Gaza.
A significant expansion.
But a necessary one. This physically severs terrestrial and subterranean connections to the Sinai Peninsula and tightly monitors the maritime border. This is not arbitrary expansionism. It is a calculated, necessary spatial requirement to interdict weapon smuggling routes and disrupt the regeneration of militant forces. If the international community will not secure the border, Israel must hold the ground itself.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. That territorial expansion is reaching critical domestic and international limits. Let us examine the intelligence derived from global discourse and traditional reporting.
Go ahead.
Approximately 30% of global social and traditional media sentiment currently condemns the civilian toll generated by this exact strategy. We must note, for instance, the recent strike on a police post in the Tuam area of northern Gaza.
Yes, that was widely reported.
It resulted in the death of a 13-year-old boy. These incidents are not occurring in a vacuum. They severely degrade international support and validate the narrative of the opposition.
But, military operations inevitably carry tragic civilian costs. How does that explicitly alter the strategic calculus?
Because the strategic calculus requires domestic and international consensus to sustain itself, and that consensus is collapsing. We must look at the domestic Israeli political landscape itself.
The political landscape is always shifting.
But this shift is highly specific. Prominent opposition figures, specifically Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid, and Gadi Eisenkot, are currently forming a coalition precisely because they are warning the public about this strategy.
They are acting as political opposition does.
Their assessment, which we must weigh carefully, is that this prolonged, expanding military control to the Orange Line may be increasingly driven by electoral calculations to maintain the current government rather than purely objective strategic necessity. They are pointing to a timeline that stretches military occupation indefinitely without a clear political exit strategy.
The political exit strategy relies on an entity willing to govern without violence. Which brings us back to the failure of diplomatic pressure. Let us examine the U.S. established Board of Peace.
which is currently struggling to maintain relevance.
I disagree. On May 19th, this international body officially announced its intention to urge the United Nations Security Council to exert direct, robust pressure on Hamas to disarm. This formally validates the core Israeli and American perspective.
Validates in rhetoric, perhaps.
Validates in principle. Hamas's refusal to decommission its weapons is the sole, definitive obstacle to the reconstruction of Gaza and the implementation of the ceasefire.
I question the efficacy of that specific diplomatic push.
The efficacy lies in correctly identifying the root cause of the conflict. To understand the mechanism here, one must recognize how Hamas operates politically. They treat their weaponry not merely as a set of military tools, but as the foundational core of their political identity.
That is their ideological stance, yes.
Right, because they conflate their military arsenal with their right to exist as a political entity. Voluntary compliance is a psychological and structural impossibility. Think of it like a deeply entrenched root system beneath a damaged foundation.
Okay.
You cannot simply ask the roots to stop growing. You have to physically excavate them. External dismantling remains the only logical course of action to clear the ground for reconstruction.
But the excavation process you describe is destroying the soil entirely.
It is clearing the hazard.
Laying sole responsibility on Hamas while structurally ignoring the impact of Israeli military actions has in fact paralyzed the very diplomatic mechanism you just described. The international community is not unified behind this board of peace approach. It is severely fractured.
Fractured by what, exactly?
To illustrate this, we need only look at the actions of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. He is actively and publicly calling for the abolition of Israel's new military tribunals for Palestinian militants.
Those tribunals were established to expedite the processing of thousands of individuals detained under suspicion of militant activity. It is a legal necessity given the volume.
Yes, but by expediting that process, they bypass civilian legal frameworks, they suspend standard evidentiary rules, and they introduce the possibility of capital punishment.
In a military context.
When the primary human rights apparatus of the United Nations is directly challenging the legal framework of the occupying military force, the diplomatic mechanism cannot function smoothly. The expectation that the Security Council will unanimously pressure Hamas while ignoring these structural and legal controversies ignores the fundamental mechanics of international diplomacy. The pressure is being applied to both sides simultaneously, freezing any meaningful progress.
Well, that fracturing of international consensus is precisely what is driving a necessary evolution in Israel's broader strategic alliances, most notably regarding its relationship with the United States.
A relationship that is under intense scrutiny.
And evolving. If international bodies are paralyzed by debates over tribunals, Israel must secure its own operational freedom. Prime Minister Netanyahu has recently announced a long-term strategic plan to phase out U.S. military financial support over the next decade.
This would be the planned transition away from the $38 billion Memorandum of Understanding established for the 2019 to 2028 period.
Correct. This represents a highly calculated evolution for Israeli security. By achieving financial military self-sufficiency, Israel aims to counter Iran and its regional proxies without being persistently tethered to shifting American political dynamics.
Shifting dynamics in Washington.
Yes, we have observed this shift. Figures like Senator Cory Booker have explicitly criticized the current military policies as a reckless war that endangers broader security. By establishing strategic independence, Israel ensures its operational tempo in Gaza and against Iranian-backed forces elsewhere cannot be dictated by domestic American electoral pressures or fluctuating public sentiment.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the empirical realism of this self-sufficiency narrative amidst a widening regional conflict?
In what sense?
In the sense of pure logistics. The factual evidence indicates that unilateral action in Gaza is inextricably linked to and heavily reliant upon American military supply chains and deterrence capabilities.
Israel's domestic defense industry is highly robust.
Robust, but not infinite. We have a concrete data point from recent intelligence. The United States recently depleted half of its available interceptor missiles specifically to defend Israel from Iranian missile barrages.
That was a coordinated defensive maneuver.
It was a massive logistical expenditure that Israel could not have absorbed independently.
But the 10-year timeline for phasing out support is designed to build that independent capacity over time.
Over time, perhaps, but the threat is immediate. Social media analysis and sentiment tracking across Stylo Intel revealed deep public anxiety regarding a wider war involving Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps right now.
The threat landscape is certainly expanding.
Exactly. The recent incidents in the Strait of Hormuz and the coordination between Hamas and Iranian forces demonstrate that the conflict is no longer contained to the Gaza Strip. The assertion that Israel can untether itself from U.S. logistics while simultaneously managing an escalating multi-front war with Iranian proxies is not currently supported by the military supply chain realities. It is a theoretical goal crashing into the hard wall of present-day warfare.
Well, to summarize the findings of our analysis today, the intelligence and facts on the ground dictate that a firm, security-first approach remains the most logical mechanism for stability. The data confirms that peace cannot structurally coexist with an armed organization that treats resistance as its core identity and refuses all avenues of voluntary demilitarization.
From a strictly military standpoint, yes.
Right. The historical precedent of peace with Egypt and Jordan proves that stability requires a willing partner. In the absence of one, Israel's current strategic posture, including the deployment of the Nile Task Force, the targeted eliminations of military leadership, and the establishment of the Orange Line buffer zone, is a necessary, factual response to an unmet condition for peace.
And summarizing the opposing data, we see that overwhelming military force and territorial division are currently yielding diminishing strategic returns.
Diminishing, in your view?
Leaving 2 million civilians in an unsustainable position. Furthermore, the reliance on expedited military tribunals and continued operations is isolating key international mechanisms, it's emboldening domestic political opposition, and pushing the entire Middle East toward a broader systemic conflict involving Iranian proxies, a conflict that neither side currently possesses the absolute logistical capacity to fully contain.
Both of these analytical frameworks acknowledge the immense, multifaceted complexities involved in attempting to transition from a fragile, frequently violated ceasefire to a permanent, functional post-war governance structure in the region.
Indeed. The listener must carefully weigh the stark realities of immediate security demands against the long-term geopolitical, diplomatic, and humanitarian costs. The balance between these forces remains the defining strategic question of this conflict.
Thank you for following our analysis today. For those requiring continuous updates on this situation, we direct your attention to the Stylo News application. Available as both a mobile and desktop computer app, Stylo News allows individuals to download and customize personal, intelligent-style briefs.
The system continuously aggregates data from hundreds of traditional global news sources and cross-references that with real-time sentiment and reporting from X, formerly known as Twitter. It is a remarkable capability for anyone looking to monitor these rapidly evolving timelines and global policy shifts.
We highly urge our listeners to subscribe and obtain AI-powered news on demand by visiting www.stylonews.com.
And with that, we'll step away from the anchor desk. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today and listening to this debate. It's always a pleasure to step out of the formalities and unpack these heavy topics with you all.
Absolutely. It's been a really great conversation. We appreciate you tuning in every week. If there is a specific global issue or topic you'd like us to tackle in our future broadcasts, please don't hesitate to reach out and request it.
Yeah, and make sure to follow Stylo News on all your favorite social media platforms to keep the conversation going.
So until next time, remember, the facts are constantly shifting, and understanding the mechanisms behind the headlines is the best way to navigate them. Have a great weekend, everyone.